Shri Atha Panchodashaadhyayah Purushottam Yoga, the Yoga of the Supreme Person. Bhagavad Gita, Text 1. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Urdhvamulam Adha Shakha Ashwatham Prahuravyayam Chandamsi Yasya Parnani Yastam Veda Savedavit. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, it is said that there is an imperishable banyan tree that has its roots upward and its branches down, and whose leaves are the Vedic hymns. One who knows this tree is a knower of the Vedas. Athaschodhavam prasritastasya shakha guna pravriddha vishaya pravala adhascha mulani anusantatani karmanubandhini manushya-loke. The branches of this tree extend downward and upward, nourished by the three modes of material nature. The twigs are the objects of the senses. This tree also has roots going down, and these are bound to the fruitive actions of human society. Hare Krishna. Yes, Nandi Mataji, you want to read?
Yes, Prabhu Dandavats. Text 3 and 4. Narupam asyaiha tathopalabhyate nanto na chadir na cha sampratishta ashwattamayenam suviruddham mulam asanga shastrena dridena chitva tata padam tat parimargitavyam yasmin gatana nivartantiti bhuya tam eva chadyam purusham prapadde yata pravritti prasrita purani. The real form of this tree cannot be perceived in this world. No one can understand where it ends and where it begins, or where its foundation is. But with determination, one must cut down this strongly rooted tree with the weapon of detachment. Therefore, one must seek that place from which, having gone, one never returns, and there surrender to that Supreme Personality of Godhead, from whom everything began and from whom everything has extended since time immemorial. Nirmana Moha, text 5. Nirmana Moha Jita Sanga Dosha Adhyatma Nitya Vinivritta Kamaha Dvandvera Vimukta Sukha Dukha Samker Gachanti Amuda Padam Avyayam Tat. Those who are free from false prestige, illusion, and false association, who understand the eternal, who are done with material lust, who are freed from the dualities of happiness and distress, and who, bewildered and know how to surrender unto the Supreme Person, attend to that eternal kingdom. Thank you, Prabhu Dandavats.
Thank you. So I'll just say the sequence, so remember your order. Kashish Mataji, you can read, then Umesh Prabhu, Kirti Mataji, Sudhir Prabhu, then Vipul Prabhu, and then Vijay Mataji. So remember
Prabhuji, Kashish Mataji just sent a chat message that she is not able to read.
Oh, okay. Okay, so the next person. So, please.
Text number 6. Natad bhasayate suryo na shashanko na pavaka yatvat vahani vartante tatvam parama mama. That supreme abode of mine is not illuminated by the sun or moon, nor by fire or electricity. Those who reach it never return to this material world. Text number 7. Maime vansho jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana mana shashtani indriyani prakriti sthani karshati. The living entity in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. Hare Krishna.
Dandavat Pranam. Text 8. Shariram yadavapnoti yachaput kamatishvarah gruhita tvetani sanyati vayurgandha vinashayat. The living entity in the material world carries his different conception of life from one body to another as the air carries aromas. Thus he takes another kind of body and again quit it to take another. Text 9. Kshotram chakshu-sparshanam cha rasanam granameva cha adhishtaya manaschaya vishayanupasevate. The living entity, thus taking another gross body, obtain a certain type of ear, eye, tongue, nose, and sense of touch, which are grouped about the mind. He thus enjoys the particular set of sense objects. Thank you.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam. Text number 10. Ukramatam sthitam vapi bhunjanam va gunavitam vimuda napusyanti pashyanti gnana chakshusha. Translation. The foolish cannot understand how a living entity can quit his body, nor can they understand what sort of body he enjoys under the spell of the modes of nature. But one whose eyes are trained in knowledge can see all this. Number 11. Yatato yoginas chainam pashyanti atmane avasthitam yatato pye akrato mano nainam pashyanti achetasa. The endeavoring transcendentalist who are situated in self-realization can see all this clearly, but those whose minds are not developed and who are not situated in self-realization cannot see what is taking place, though they may try. Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Vipul Prabhu, you want to do?
Thank you. All glory to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna devotees. Yat aditya gatam tejo jagat bhashate khilam yat chandramasi yat chag now tat tejo vidhi mamakam. The splendor of the sun which dissipates the darkness of this whole world comes from me, and the splendor of the moon and the splendor of the fire are also from me. 15-13. Gam avishya cha bhutani dharayami aham ojasha pushnami chashuddhi sarva samabhuta rasat makho. I enter into each planet, and by my energy they stay in orbit. I become the moon and therefore supply the juice of life of all to all vegetables. Hare Krishna.
Vijaya Mataji.
I am the fire of the digestion in the bodies of all living entities, and I join with the air of life, outgoing and incoming, to digest the four kinds of foodstuff. सर्वस्य चाहं हृदि सन्निविष्टो यथा स्मृतिज्ञानपोहनं च वैदेश्च सर्वैरहमेव वेदो वेदान्तकृतविदेव चाहम्. I am seated in everyone's heart and from me come remembrance, knowledge and forgetfulness by all the Vedas. I am to be known. Indeed, I am the completer of Vedant, and I am the knower of the Vedas.
Thank you. Lakshmi Mataji, you want to read?
Hare Krishna, yes, Prabhuji. Text 13. Dav ema purusho loke sharaschakshara eva cha sharaha sharvani bhutani kutasto sharaha uchyate. There are two classes of beings, the fallible and the infallible. In the material world, every entity is fallible, and in the spiritual world, every entity is called infallible. Uttama purushastva anya paramatmane udarataha yo loke trayam avishya vibharti avyaya ishvaraha. Besides these two, there is a greatest living personality, the Supreme Soul, the imperishable Lord Himself, who has entered the three worlds and is maintaining them.
Rakesh, Prabhu, you want to read? Anyone else who has not yet read and would like to read?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Yes,
Text
please.
statement. Yasmaksharam atitoham aksharadapi chotamaha atosmi loke vede cha prathita purushottamaha. Because I am transcendental beyond both the fallible and the infallible, and because I am the greatest, I am celebrated both in the world and in the Vedas as that Supreme Person. 19. Yo mam eva asammuto janati purushottamam sa sarvavid bhajate mam sarvabhavena bharata. Whoever knows me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead without doubting is the knower of everything. He therefore engages himself in full devotional service to me, O son of Bharata. Hare Krishna.
Anyone else who has not yet read and would like to read?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, can I read?
Yes, please.
Text 20. Iti gujjatam shasram idam uktam mayangaha itad buddhaha buddhimam mansat krita kritascha bharata. This is the most confidential part of the Vedic scriptures, O sinless one, and it is disclosed now by me. Whoever understands this will become wise, and his endeavors will know perfection. Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Thank you so much. Om Tat Sadati Śrīmad-Bhagavad-Gītāšu Upanishadšu Brahma Vidyāyām Yoga Shastre Shri Krishna Arjuna Samvade Purushottama Yoga Nama Panchodasha Adhyayaha. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta translation to the 15th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita in the matter of the Yoga of the Supreme Person. So thank you so much to all the Vaishnavas for joining in this auspicious month of Purushottama and reading Bhagavad Gita. And now we will read Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. I offer my humble obeisance unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva. Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Mudiraye. Before reciting Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, which is the very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisance unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayana, unto Narayan Rishi, the supermost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Śrīla Vyasadeva, the author of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. Nashtaprayeshu abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati uttama shloke bhaktir bhavati naishtiki. By regular attendance in the classes on Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam and by rendering service unto the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed, and loving service unto the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. Guruve Gaurachandraya Radhikaya Tadalaye Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tadbhaktaye Namo Namah. Govardhanadharam Vande Gopala Goparupinam Gokulotsavaam Ishanam Govindam Gopika Priyam Vande Navaghana Shyama Dvibhujam Muralidharam Pitambaradharam Devam Sharadam Purushottamam. Thank you so much, dear Vaishnavas, for joining. We are reading Grantaraj Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 15. And we read till text number 39 yesterday, and we were discussing that how one should not give up his prescribed duties. In different ashramas, there are different prescribed duties, so one should not artificially give those up. And then, like the example was given, okay, artificially taking sannyas, and then again going back to those old habits. It's like eating one's own vomit, not a very good idea. So one should steadily and slowly keep progressing on the path of bhakti. And we also discussed the idea of spirit of renunciation, then the act of renunciation. So with that, let's move on to the next verse, text number 40. Atmanam cheda vijjaniyat param jnana dhutashayah kim icchan kasya vahetor deham pushnati lampatah. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. The human form of body is meant for understanding the self and the supreme self, the supreme personality of Godhead, both of whom are transcendently situated. If both of them can be understood when one is purified by advanced knowledge, for what reason and for whom does a foolish, greedy person maintain the body for sense gratification? Purport. Of course, everyone in this material world is interested in maintaining the body for sense gratification, but by cultivating knowledge, one should gradually understand that the body is not the self. Both the soul and the supersoul are transcendental to the material body. This is to be understood in the human form of life, especially when one takes sannyasa. A sannyasi who has understood the self should be engaged in elevating the self and associating with the super self. Our Krishna consciousness movement is meant for elevating the living being for promotion back home, back to Godhead. Seeking such elevation is one's duty in the form of human form of life, in the human form of life. Unless one performs this duty, why should one maintain the body? Especially if a sannyasi not only maintains the body by ordinary means, but does everything to maintain the body, including even eating meat and other abominable things, he must be a lampata, a greedy person, simply engaged in sense gratification. A sannyasi must specifically remove himself from the urges of the tongue, belly, and genitals which disturb one as long as one is not fully aware that the body is separate from the soul. Hare Krishna. So in this beautiful verse, the reason is mentioned. What is the purpose of human form of life? Many people, nowadays there are seminar. What is your purpose? What is your why? What is your purpose? So this verse in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam is clearly telling what is the purpose of human form of life. It is not to get a big car. It is not to get a big house. It is not to get big degrees. It is not for getting being a president or prime minister, etc., etc. Very, very, clearly the scriptures are telling it is meant for understanding the self and the supreme self. That is Atma and Paramatma. And what after understanding? We just read in Bhagavad Gita chapter 15. One who understanding without application is of no use. For example, someone does PhD degree, but is only using ABCD, then what's the use of PhD? Someone does law degree, but is only, using 2 plus 2. What's the use of that degree? The point is that understanding or knowledge without application is futile pretty much. So So the Shastras are saying that human form of life, that is our form, what we have, the soul has received out of 8.4 million species. We are fortunate to be blessed with this human form of life, which is like the right medium, the right vehicle, the right boat, the right path to go back home, back to Godhead. And if we take the shelter of Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, then Prabhupada is mentioning that that's what our Krishna consciousness movement, the main purpose is what? To deliver one from the cycle of birth and death, so that one does not have to become a cat, mad, bat, go into the species of Punarapi Jananam, Punarapi Maranam, keep on taking repeated birth and death and suffer in this material world. This material world is full of suffering. Our movement is meant to give eternal happiness, which is back home, back to Godhead. So that is the real purpose. And otherwise, being a lampata, being a greedy person, engaged in sense gratification, engaged in the urges of tongue, belly, etc., not a very healthy idea. So one should gradually and steadily advance oneself to understand who am I, who is God, what is the process to go back home, back to Godhead, and what is awaiting there. That is Krishna Prema, eternal happiness. So why should I engage in so-called illusory happiness when the eternal happiness is awaiting? And even that's not that, okay, after death you'll go there. Even in this life, a devotee is very, very happy. A devotee is free from even in this life. One who is steadily engaging in Krishna conscious, a pure devotee is not bewildered by the ups and downs, by the dualities of this world. So that's so nicely the human life is meant for self-realization. Any comments? Anyone has any questions, comments?
Yeah, I have a question. So in this particular purport and verse, it's talking about the sannyasi. So sannyasi is already a self-realized soul, isn't he? Why would he, after having studied everything and knows everything to get to the stage, why would he fall down?
That's the whole point from the last couple of verses.
Yeah, but I don't
Because
get it.
Maya is strong. That's why. Maya is strong. Devi Esha Gudamai Mam Maya Duratya. If the sannyasis think, okay, now I'm self-realized, now I can do what I want, now I can associate with women, I will not be disturbed, I am there to purify them, now I can accept millions of donations and use significant portion for my own senses. Uh, Prabhupada said that if we are not sufficiently afraid of Maya, then we'll fall down. We should always have a healthy fear. It should not be like fear, but healthy fear that I am vulnerable. Uh, I am not a pure devotee. A pure devotee never considers oneself or himself, herself to be a pure devotee. Prabhupada also said one time, I'm praying so that I don't fall down. Of course, he's a pure devotee, but a pure devotee always thinks like that. A healthy fear. So there have been many cases in the past. For example, Ajamil's story. He was quite self-realized. Jad Bharat, the Bharat, on the stage of Bhava, we read that, but got attached to the deer and pretty much fell down. So there is padam padam yad vipadam. There is danger at every step, especially in this day and age. So much allurements. So if one is not careful, then there is certainly risk of falling down.
Okay, thank you, bro.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. Yes, Nandini Mataji, you want to say something?
Yes, this one point very nicely you said, answered. Ajamila, it took 1 second. He just saw the act for 1 second and it disturbed his mind. There are so many billboards, I think Prabhupada writes in those purports. There are so many billboards as soon as we come out of the street. We don't even have to go to the forest and see anything. So it takes 1 second, 1 second distraction. Back to you, Prabhu. Thank you so much.
Dear Prabhu, you want to say something? Thank you, Nandana Mataji.
I can read, Prabhuji.
How you want to read? Okay, so it's a little longer purport. You can read 1 or 2 paragraphs.
Okay, thank you. Text number 41. Aho sariram ratam indriyani hayun abhishun mana indriyesam vartmani matra disanam chasutam sattvam brahad bandhuram isha sastam. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Transcendentalists who are advanced in knowledge compare the body, which is made by the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, to a chariot. The senses are like horses. The mind, the master of the senses, is like reins. The objects of the senses are the destinations. Intelligence is the chariot driver, and the consciousness, which spreads throughout the body, is the cause of bondage of this material world. Purport. For bewildered person in the materialistic way of life, the body, the mind, and the senses, which are engaged in sense gratification, are the cause of bondage of repeated birth, death, old age, and disease. But for one who is advanced in spiritual knowledge, the same body, senses, minds are the cause of liberation. This is confirmed in Katha Upanishad as follows. Atmanam Atmanam Ratinam Viddhi Shariram Ratam Evacha Buddhim Tu Sarathim Viddhi Mana Pragraham Evacha Indriyani Hayan Ahur Vishyam Vishyamsteshu Gocharan Sodhuva Sodhvana Param Apnoti Tad Vishnu Paramam Padam. The soul is the occupant of the chariot of the body, of which the driver is the intelligence. The mind is the determination to reach the destination. The senses are the horses, and the sense objects are also included in that activity. Thus, one can reach the destination. Vishnu, who is Parampadam, the supreme goal of life. In conditioned life, the consciousness in the body is the cause of bondage. But the same consciousness, when transformed into Kṛṣṇa consciousness, becomes the cause of one's returning home back to Godhead. Prabhuji, you want me to stop here?
Sure.
So, Prabhuji, I think here, it's Srila Prabhupada is clearly stating, I think we would have read in Bhagavad Gita also, how, our senses are compared to the horses, and, the reins, the mind, and then the intelligence is the, the controller, the driver, and the chariot, the passenger is kind of a, the soul. So here, we can also read in Bhagavad Gita, the mind can be a best friend or the worst enemy. So who, if the, here Srila Prabhupada says, for a bewildered person in the materialistic way of life, the body and mind and the senses which are engaged in sense gratification is a bondage of repeated birth and death. But at the same time, who is advanced in bhakti yoga, spiritual knowledge, at the same mind can cause the liberation. So, this is very nice for us to, kind of think about how the body and mind, BMW, should be used in the service of Krishna. Back to you, Prabhuji. Please, Hare Krishna.
Okay, thank you, Prabhu. So, Ikant Prabhu, you want to read next two verses? Sorry, two paragraphs, I mean.
Sure, Prabhu. Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Devotees and all pranams. The human body, therefore, may be used in two ways: for going to the darkest regions of ignorance, or for going forward, back home, back to Godhead. To go back to Godhead, the path is Mahat Seva, to accept the self-realized spiritual master. Mahat Sevam Dwaram Ahur Vimukhyata. For liberation, one should accept the direction of authorized devotees who can actually endow one with perfect knowledge. On the other hand, Tamodvaram Yash, Yasitam Sangi Sangamaha. If one wants to go to the darkest regions of the material existence, one may continue to associate with persons who are attached to women. Yositam Sangis Sangam. The word Yosit means women. Persons who are too materialistic are attached to women. It is said, therefore, Atmanam Ratinam Vidi Sariram Ratham Evacha. The body is just like a chariot or a car in which one may go anywhere. One may drive well, or else one may drive whimsically, in which case it is quite possible that he may have an accident and fall into a ditch. In other words, if one takes directions from the experienced spiritual master, one can go back home, back to Godhead. Otherwise, one may return to the cycle of birth and death. Prabhu, can I stop here, Prabhu?
Sure. Would someone else like to complete? Who has not read
Yeah, I can
this
read.
week? Yes.
Yeah. Therefore, Krishna personally advises.
Hare Krishna. Oh. Yes, please continue.
Asradadana Purusha Dharmasyasa Parantapa Aprapya Mam Nivratante Mrityu Samsara Vartmani. Those who are not faithful on the path of devotional service cannot attain me, O conqueror of foes, but return to birth and death in this material world. Bhagavad Gita 9.3. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, personally gives instructions on how one can return home, back to Godhead. But if one does not care to listen to his instructions, the result will be that one will never go back to Godhead, but will continue life in this miserable condition of repeated birth and death in material existence. Mrityu samsara vratmani. The advice of experienced transcendentalists, therefore, is that the body be fully engaged for achieving the ultimate goal of life, swatta gatim. The real interest or goal of life is to return home back to Godhead. To enable one to fulfill this purpose, there are so many Vedic literatures, including Vedanta Sutra, the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, Mahabharata, and the Ramayana. One should take lessons from these Vedic literatures and learn how to practice Nivritti Marga. Then one's life will be perfect. The body is important as long as it has consciousness. Without consciousness, the body is merely a lump of matter. Therefore, to return home, back to Godhead, one must change his consciousness from material consciousness to Krishna consciousness. One's consciousness is the cause of material bondage. But if this consciousness is purified by Bhakti Yoga, one can then understand the falsity of his upadhi, his designations as Indian, American, Hindu, Muslim, Christian, and so on. Sarvopati vinirmuktam, tat paratvena nirmalam. One must forget these designations and use this consciousness only for the service of Krishna. Therefore, if one takes advantage of the Krishna conscious movement, his life is certainly successful. Thank you, Prabhu. Back to you.
Thank you, Sudhir Prabhu, and Vikrant Prabhu, and Ravi Prabhu for reading so nicely. So, this purport tells, and Prabhupada's Bhaktanta purport tells the importance of this verse. Any verse which is more important, Prabhupada elaborates it more so that conditioned souls like myself can try to understand and follow the instructions. The analogy of, let's share this picture, chariot is given in this verse. So basically the idea is the horses, chariot has 5 horses, which are like the 5 senses. Now the senses want to go where? To sense objects. The eyes want to see something beautiful, the ears want to hear something nice, music, the taste buds want to eat something nice, etc. But who guides them? We just read. Where? In Bhagavad Gita. Manashashtani indriyani. The mind is compared to the 6th sense, because mind is basically what, through the medium of the intelligence, the mind is like the range, the connection between the intelligence or the intellect, who's the chariot here, and the senses. Now, the difference is that we can make the best use of the body by using the body in the service of the Lord. The eyes, nose, ears, tongue, everything can be used in the service of the Lord. And that's basically the path of Bhakti Yoga. We are engaging right now our eyes to read the Shastra, our ears to hear Shastra, our nose to smell the fragrance of the incense offered to the Lord, our hands to open the book. So we are certainly using our senses. But the same senses can be used to watch inappropriate content or hear bad stuff, which will pollute our consciousness and take us to the hellish life also, the life of cats and dogs also. So, His Grace Gaur Gopal Prabhu used to say this life is a line segment between B and D. B is birth and D is death. And between B and D comes C. That C is the C of choice. So what do we want to use our body for? To degrade to the lowest species, or to uplift and go back home, back to Godhead? And how will the mind control? Through the medium of chariot here? And that's the chariot driver is intelligence. So by reading Shastras, by discussing Shastras, we are understanding what is the right use of senses and what is the wrong use of senses. So that means we are nourishing our intelligence. We are nourishing our good self, our good dog. And we are refraining from opposite things. We are refraining from things which are polluting our consciousness. Again, that's a choice. No one is forcing us to come here for the Bhagavatam call. Of course, someone may inspire, which is good and healthy, but no one is pulling your hand every day. Hey, you have to join, otherwise, you'll get a $50 fine. That's not the case. So everyone is joining out of their own choice. Similarly, in the wrong way also, in like going to a casino or a pub no one is going to say, if you don't come to our casino or pub, you will get $100 fine. It's not that they are, but what is the thing which drags? The intelligence. Because if the intelligent driver, the chariot driver is weak, then the horses are wild. Sometimes you may have seen like a powerful, dog is dragging the owner, because the dog is more powerful than the owner, and the owner is being dragged by the dog. But if the owner is more powerful, or the person who is, taking care of the dog then they can control. So similarly, if the intelligence is powerful, that means nourished, by Guru Sadhu Shastra. The example here is very, very clearly mentioned. If one takes directions from the experienced spiritual master, one can go back home, back to Godhead. Guru Karnadhara. So human life is like a boat. Who is the captain of the boat? Is the spiritual master who helps us to go back home, back to Godhead. So this analogy is very, very pertinent, and so that we can nourish our intelligence and make good choices in life, so that we can make the best use of our human body, which is to go back home, back to Godhead. If not, then, as we have read multiple times, the science also will say entropy always increases. By default, the tendency of the conditioned mind is to go in the wrong direction, to go and break the principles of meat eating, intoxication, etc. But to purify, we have to follow, nourish the intelligence, and follow the upstream, or go against the flow, because majority of the people, the herd is going in one direction. 99% of the people are going in one direction. If we, or 99.99%, if we continue to follow that blindly, then we will go where everyone else is going. So we have to follow the path of Guru Sadhu Shastra, and that will take us where? Back home, back to Godhead. So again, human life is a life of choice, and all of you are using that choice in the right way by taking shelter of Bhagavatam, spiritual master, and the devotees. So with that, we will certainly go back home, back to Godhead. Any comments, questions? This is very important words actually. Text number 41 to 46 talk about this analogy of Nirkaya Ratham. There is a Ratha or chariot, Nirkaya, the body, and the Ratha analogy. Very important verses. And this one is actually the most important. So if it should be as clear, so that if tonight at 2 a.m. your friend calls, okay, what did you learn? Okay, you should be able to explain all the points. This is very, very important, and it's like it should be very, very deeply ingrained in our consciousness, at least theoretically. Then we'll try to follow it. So yes, Vamsilas.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. In this analogy of the chariot, in the verse it said the consciousness is that which spreads all over the body. But is there any object within the chariot that we can see as the consciousness, or is it just the whole situation is the consciousness?
Consciousness is basically the self in this scenario. That's referred to the I, or the soul. That's the passenger, kind of, in this example, the passenger, or the seat of the charioteer. So that's the self. Because consciousness is the symptom of soul. Without soul, there is no consciousness. So we can safely say that consciousness is basically referring to the self, because that's how we'll be Krishna conscious. If we engage, or we'll be worldly conscious. If we engage our intellect in worldly things, then senses will go towards worldly things, then the consciousness be polluted. Similarly, if we engage our intellect in Krishna consciousness, our senses in Krishna consciousness, then the whole consciousness will become Krishna conscious. So, and the self will purify and go back home. Does that answer, Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhuji. Because in the picture it showed that the self or the soul is the passenger. So I was thinking, is there like similar analogy for consciousness, or it seems like the self and the consciousness are combined as the passenger in this analogy. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Prabhu. Anyone else? Anything else before we move on? Okay, please raise your hand if you would like to read. We'll go to the next verse, text 42. Who has not read this week so far? Please raise your hand. Lakshmi Mataji, have you read? You want to read?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Yeah, I will read Prabhuji. Text 42. Aksham dasha pranam adharma dharmo chakre bhimanam ratinam cha jivam dhanurhi tasya pranavam pradanti sharam tu jivam param eva lakshyam. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. The 10 kinds of air acting within the body are compared to the spokes of the chariot's wheels, and the top and bottom of the wheel itself are called religion and irreligion. The living entity in the bodily concept of life is the owner of the chariot. The Vedic mantra, Pranava, is the bow. The pure living entity himself is the arrow, and the target is the Supreme Being. Purport. 10 kinds of life air always flows within the material body. They are called prana, apana, samana, vyana, udana, naga, kurma, krakala, devadatta, and dhananjaya. They are compared here to the spokes of the chariot wheels. The life air is the energy for all of the living beings' activities, which are sometimes religious and sometimes irreligious. Thus, religion and irreligion are said to be the upper and lower portions of the chariot's wheels. When the living entity decides to go back home, back to Godhead, his target is Lord Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the conditioned state of life, one does not understand that the goal of life is the Supreme Lord. Nate vidu swarta gatim hi Vishnum durasaya he bahir artha mananina. The living entity tries to be happy within this material world, not understanding the target of his life. When he is purified, however, he gives up his bodily conception of life and his false identity as belonging to a certain community, a certain nation, a certain society, a certain family, and so on. Sarvopadi vinirmuktam tat paratvena nirmalam. Then he takes the arrow of his purified life, and with the help of the bow, the transcendental chanting of pranava or the Hare Krishna mantra, he throws himself towards the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Should I continue, Prabhuji?
Let's see if someone else wants to read. Nayan Prabhu, want to read?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Dhanyavad Pranam devotees. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakura has commented that because the words bow and arrow are used in this verse, one might argue that the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity have become enemies. However, although the Supreme Personality of Godhead may become the so-called enemy of the living being, this is his chivalrous pleasure. For example, Lord fought with Vishnu. When Vishnu pierced the Lord's body on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, this was a kind of humor or relationship, of which there are 12. When the conditioned soul tries to reach the Lord by hurling an arrow at him, the Lord takes pleasure, and the living entity gains the profit of being back home, back to Godhead. Another example given in this regard is that Arjuna, as a result of piercing Adharamina, or the fish within the chakra, achieved the valuable gain of Draupadi. Similarly, if the arrow of chanting of the holy name of the Lord one pierces Lord Vishnu's lotus feet, by dint of performing this heroic activity of devotional service, one receives the benefit of returning home back to Godhead. Hare Krishna Prabhuji, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Lakshmi Mataji and Nayan Prabhu for reading this wonderful verse. So the analogy continues further. The spokes of life, the spokes of wheels are the 10 life heirs upon Pran. We read in Bhagavad Gita chapter 15 also, where the 5 types of Vayu were mentioned. Here 10 types is mentioned. Then passenger is basically referred to as the conditioned soul. And then we have the bow and the arrow. The wheels, top and bottom, are like the dharma, adharma. It keeps moving. Sometimes dharma, sometimes adharma. And then through the bow of the holy name, the arrow of pure soul can go to the target, and that is Lord Krishna's lotus feet. It's a very nice metaphorical way of explaining this whole point, that the goal of life is to take shelter of Krishna's lotus feet. And what is the process? The process is the holy name. So if one takes shelter of the holy name, because the arrow cannot be released without the bow. So the bow is very, very important. So the holy name is the process with which the soul, that's the arrow, can go back home, back to Godhead. And if not, then we'll keep struggling in this up and down, 10 life heirs, dharma, adharma, and then the conditioned soul will keep moving. A very important point is mentioned, that how one receives the bow or the holy name is by the mercy of Guru. So, Guru Krishna Prasada Poy, Bhakti Lata Bija. So the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, which is coming from Lord Chaitanya and the Brahma Madhava Gaudiya Parampara, is actually the mercy of Guru. And if we take it seriously, then yes, there is absolute success. And if not, then back to grind. Any other comments, questions, reflections anyone has? Wants to share anything? Okay, so we have time for one more verse. Let's read. So please raise your hand if you would like to read.
Sorry,
You have
one quick question, Prabhu.
Yes.
Prabhuji, here in the bow and arrow analogy, Prabhu, so the arrow is basically, it's us we are trying to aim ourselves towards Lord Vishnu's lotus feet for returning home back to Godhead. And like, what will be the bow, Prabhu, in this analogy? Is it
the bow is here is mentioned pranava or the mantra. So Prabhupada mentions in the purport that the bow is the holy name, the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, the process in this day and age which can take us back home, back to Godhead. So if we set ourselves rightly in the right intent, and we had that detailed seminar with that consciousness, if we chant the holy name purely, then that will take us back home, back to Godhead. So that's the bow.
Thank you very much. So I missed that part.
Yeah, no worries, Prabhu. Yes, Babu Kanayan Prabhu, you want to start the next verse and read maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. So, rago dveshascha lobhascha sokam mau bhayam mada mano vamano suyascha maya himsa cha matsara raja pramada sunnidra satravasti yevam adaya rajastama prakritya sattva prakritiye Vachit. Translation. In the conditional stage, one's conception of life are sometimes polluted by passion and ignorance, which are exhibited by attachment, hostility, greed, lamentation, illusion, fear, madness, false prestige, insults, fault finding, deception, envy, intolerance, passion, bewilderment, hunger, and sleep. All of these are enemies. Sometimes one's conceptions are also polluted by goodness. Purport. The actual aim of life is to go back home, back to Godhead, but there are many hindrances created by three modes of material nature, sometimes by combination of Rajoguna and Tamoguna, the modes of passion and ignorance, and sometimes by mode of goodness. In the material world, even if one is philanthropist, a nationalist, and good man, according to materialistic estimations, this conception of life form hindrance to spiritual advancement. How much more of hindrance then are hostility, greed, illusion, lamentation, and too much attachment to the material enjoyment. To progress towards the target of Vishnu, which is our real self-interest, one must become very powerful in conquering these various hindrances or enemies. In other words, one should not be attached to being a good man or bad man in the material world. Uh, uh, should I continue? Guru?
Let's see if someone else would like to read.
Yeah.
Anyone? Mr. Jayamata,
Hare
if you want
Krishna
to.
Prabhu, I can read.
Yeah, please.
Dandavat Pranam. In this material world, so-called goodness and badness are the same because they consist of three modes of material nature. One must transcend this material nature. Even the ritualistic ceremony consists of three modes of material nature. Therefore, Krishna advised Arjuna, Traigunyo Vishaya Veda Naisargunyo Bhavarjuna Nirdvandvo Nityasattvasto Nirgo Nirgoyo Kshema Atmavan. The Vedas mainly deal with the subject of three modes of material nature. Rise above these modes, O Arjuna. Be transcendental to all of them. Be free from all dualities and from all anxiety for the gain and safety, and be established in the self. Bhagavad Gita 2.45. Elsewhere, Bhagavad Gita, the Lord say, Urdhvam gacchati sattvasta. If one becomes very good person, in the other word, if one is in the mode of goodness, he may be elevated to the higher planetary system. Similarly, one is infected by Rajoguna and Tamoguna, he may remain in this world or go down to the animal kingdom. But all of these situations are the hindrance on the path of spiritual salvation. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu therefore says, ब्रह्मांडे भ्रमिते कोर्ण भाग्यवान जीव Guru Krishna Prasade Paya Bhakti Lata Bij. If one is fortunate enough to transcend all this, it's called goodness and badness, and come to the platform of devotional service by the mercy of Krishna and the Guru, his life becomes successful. In this regard, one must be very bold so that he can conquer these enemies of Krishna consciousness, not caring for the good and bad of this material world. One must bodily propagate Krishna consciousness. So, in this verse, Prabhupada ji is giving the solution for the all the hindrance on the path of the devotional service, and he has mentioned here that attachment, greed, lamentation, fear, false prestige are the biggest obstacle in the path of the devotional service, because uh, the material mode of nature affects us in the material world. Like if the mode of goodness is good, you will go to the higher planetary system. But the mode of passion and ignorance rise in our life, you will go to the lower planetary system. And that's what Krishna also asking Arjuna to raise above these modes of material nature to go back to the Godhead. And Prabhupada is saying that Guru and Krishna can give us the beej of a bhakti, and with the help of Guru, we can go back to the Krishna, to his spiritual world. And that is the main purpose of Krishna consciousness. Thank you, Prabhu. Back to you.
Thank you, Baba Gunayan, Prabhu, and Kirti Mataji. Nice reading and sharing. It's interesting, just like I'm sharing my screen. I hope you can all see that. Just 2 days back, I was talking to some kids about this verse 2.45, and that's what Srila Prabhupada is quoting, and it talks about the three modes. So, of course, ignorance and passion are very, very big enemies in the journey of the soul back home, back to Godhead. Laziness, greed, intoxication, oversleeping, etc., anger, frustration, too much in desires. All these are big enemies. But Prabhupada is making a very interesting point, which is sometimes hard for normal people to understand, that how come goodness be an obstacle? Goodness can also be an obstacle because some people will, well, look at me. I'm running this hospital. If I don't support this hospital, then people will be suffering. If I don't give this charity, then what about these kids? They will go to hell, or they will be, I'm the one who is providing food. I'm the one who's providing the medical things. I'm the one who's providing blanket. So the I will still not go. So what's the destination? Urdhvam gachanti, urdhvam, upper planets, madhyastha tishthat rajasa. The middle planets for in the middle, rajaguna, and lower, tama gachanti, adho gachanti tamasa. They go to lower planets. So I asked the kids question, and all of them, they were so intelligent. If I have to bind you on your chair with gold chain, silver chain, and iron chain, which chain would you pick? So no one picked any chain. They were all very intelligent. No one picked any. No one wants to be bound. Because who wants to be bound in this material world? So even if it's a gold chain, yes, it may, be a gold chain, but who wants to be bound by the modes of material nature? So what's the idea? Shuddha Sattva, pure goodness, devotional service under the direction of Guru Sadhu Shastra. That's pure goodness. And what's the destination of such a person? Back home, back to Godhead. So we have to gradually move this way, but not stay there. We have to come to pure goodness. And that is what, transcend. That was their word. Transcend means to rise above, to go beyond the limits of. So Krishna is saying, become transcendental to all three, not just to ignorance, not just to passion. So slowly move from here to goodness and become transcendental. Fighting is apparently an act of passion, which Krishna encouraged Arjuna to do. But was it in the mode of passion? Certainly not. That's also called, this is called a karma also. The karma which will not lead to any reactions. That means it's Shuddha Sattva, pure goodness. So just thought to share this. Any comments, questions anyone has? Any additions? We discussed a couple of very important points today, actually, the core of our philosophy. Yeah, please try to absorb more. Anyone has any comments, questions, reflections?
Roji, Hare Krishna, is the Nivritti mark, what is exactly Nivritti mark? Is it same like Bhakti mark?
Yeah, Nivritti basically, ultimately referring to back home, back to Godhead in a general sense. So pravrittim cha, nivrittim cha. Pravrittim is basically more like sense gratification, and nivrittim is basically the. There are a lot of details, but Prabhupada often says, uses that word interchangeably sometimes. Yes, so we can say the path back home, back to Godhead. Now the monist or the impersonalist may link that to Brahma Jyoti, but devotees link it to back home, back to God. Anything else?
Thank
you. Okay, so we are already past time. We will stop here and continue tomorrow with the next verse. So thank you so much again for joining. Grantraj Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki jai, Śrīla Prabhupada ki jai, Samaveta Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyeva cha patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.